Okay, all good.
So I am an economics student here in Tennessee, and finally decided to
So what,
pursue.
what city is that, or is Eastern Tennessee in?
Yeah, so Eastern Tennessee, there's a Tri-Cities, which is Johnson City. It's about a couple hours east of Knoxville, so right up in the corner there.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm near there, East
Okay.
Tennessee State University. So I'm going there mostly because I get a free ride and I can get a bachelor's there pretty quickly. They'll accept a lot of my transfer credits. So I'm at this point, I'm considering going to a bachelor's degree. I haven't, I mean, a PhD. I haven't decided PhD, master's, MBA. Looking at those options, and so I've been listening to a lot of your lectures, read a couple of your books, and so I thought this is a guy who's really interesting to talk to. I'm in the libertarian world as well, so I have a few questions.
All
What
right.
kind of timetable do you have? Because I don't want to take up too much of your
Half an
time.
hour, good.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
All right, let's do it.
So I have a bunch of different, just kind of random things. So I'll start and just we'll kind of popcorn around. So first, the reputation of George Mason University. I've asked a couple people about this, talked to a couple of graduates from there, Patrick Newman and Stephen Efremov. What employers and universities coming out of George Mason, what's George Mason's reputation?
So I'll just talk about the econ program. So I would say that students that want to be in this area, generally do very well. That this is a booming area still. In terms of getting academic jobs, I'd say that our best students usually get jobs at teaching schools, and then other econ students get jobs in think tanks, government, business. So I mean, like when people are asking, should I come here? I'll say, okay, so just giving you totally, to advice totally in your interest. What I normally advise people is say, look, if you get at a school that is ranked 30 or better, and you're willing to suffer during that time, then I would tell you to go to the school that's ranked 30 or better. If you can't get into a school ranked better than 30, or you just know that you're the kind of person that will give up in the face if you're really bored and unhappy, then you should come to Mason. So that's what I always advise people. So basically, Mason, depending upon who you ask, is like somewhere in the 30s or 40s or 50s in terms of ranking. But the main thing is that our students here have just much higher morale. They're enjoying themselves a lot more than most people at other schools, which again, and of course, especially free market and libertarian students are having a very good time here. So people at Mason are having just a much better experience. And then again, the main thing is that it would be very unusual for one of our students to get a job at a research university, but we do have tons of connections at teaching schools all over the country and the world. So there's just a bunch of departments where our students either have at least a presence, or some of them our students run them.
So maybe George Mason's a good starting place for within that community. But if you're going for like top ranking corporate or research, it may be better to do for a
if you, I mean, in general, I'd say if you can get into a school that is clearly better, or you just and you're willing to go and suffer. So top programs, a lot of suffering. I went to Princeton. First year we barely did economics. It's just like a math degree.
Right. Is there any crucial preparation you would recommend if I choose to go into a PhD program, either at George Mason or somewhere else?
All right. Well, so there's the strategic preparation. If you're willing to go and do a double major in math, then that counts for a lot. If you're willing to do a double major in CS, that counts for a good amount as well. So something that is much easier that will definitely that will separate you from the pack a bit is if you can take real analysis and get an A. This is a very, to my mind, very, very boring and very difficult math class, sort of a weeder class. And if you can go and do well in that immediately and then programs say, oh, okay, he has an A in real analysis, so he's going to be able to do harder mathematics. So that's one thing. In terms of more broadly, I mean, so one big thing is just first of all, just figure out what your career goal is at all. So I would always say you should always think about any kind of education as a union card or a passport for an occupation. If all you want to do is learn, you don't need to go to school. Just read and talk to people. That's save all that money. The purpose of education is primarily to get a stamp on your forehead. It's a passport into the job you want. So first question is, what job do you want?
Right. Yeah, and I've been thinking about that significantly as well. I definitely want to go in the economics field. Originally, ideally, I'd like to work at a think tank or policy advising institution. But I don't want to go directly into teaching, though that's not out of the question long term. So right now, I'm considering maybe moving into corporate management or management consulting to gain experience in that world before moving into the think tank realm. But we'll see.
Yeah, so if you want to work in a think tank, then a PhD in economics is one of the very best credentials for that. You even now you may be able to get in with just a master's, especially if you're publishing.
Right.
So I mean, in a way, like if you want to work in a think tank, I would say just start publishing and writing think tanky type stuff, and then you'll need to get a master's eventually. But like a better investment of your time is actually to start reading stuff that's coming out of think tanks and trying to write pieces that are in that style, and then see whether you can make that happen. So you're like, if you want to be a professor, the PhD is essential. If you want to be a think tanker, then a PhD is helpful, but not essential. And it is many years.
So, and you're associated, right? And you're associated with the Mercatus and the Cato Institute. Do you have any recommendations for writing or publishing, or just starting practicing that as an undergrad?
Yeah, well, so both of them have internships that you can do. So you want to apply for those internships. I mean, the main thing with all kinds of writing, I say, is find the kind of thing that you want to write that's getting successfully published, and then try to reverse engineer it. Don't plagiarize. Okay. Reverse engineer. So write a piece that says something new that is similar to pieces that are getting published, that is the same format, the same organization. And then when you're doing that, this is also a great time to start emailing people that are writing the stuff that you like and getting on their radar. Like what I always advise people to do is read widely, find the stuff you like, and then email some questions to the author. Not just insincere questions. Email them some sincere questions, things you're curious about. Get on their radar, and then if usually they'll write back, and when they write back, have some follow-up questions, right? And then then if you read some more things from them, say, or ask them for reading advice, read some more things, ask them about those, and then after say 2 months after the initial contact, that's when you go and say, okay, I've been thinking a lot about this. I have a draft of a new piece. Would you mind giving me some comments on it? And this has dramatically amplified your odds of getting comments from them, because they know who you are. You're not just some crazy person on the internet that's asking them for a favor. Now you're someone they've already had some favorable interaction with. They think well of you, and then they can see what kind of work you're doing, and you're likely to get some help. And there's help in the project, and then there's also professional help in terms of getting it published or getting a job out of it, and so on. Right. And what I advise you to do is to try to make a lot of friends. So contact, like if you're reading think tank pieces, there must be 20 people in think tanks that are doing things that you think are good. And so, email all of them questions about their work, get on everybody's radar, right? Because you can't, most people get jobs through connections, but no one connection can ever be counted on. You want to have a lot of connections so that things will work out for you in the end. So that's important too. Let's see, in terms of graduate school applications, the number one most important piece of advice of all by far is just to apply to a lot of places. By a lot, I would say at least 15 places. There's a lot of randomness in the acceptance process, a lot of randomness in the funding process. And while you can try to improve your application, your best bet is just to accept the randomness and then just apply to a lot of places and see what happens.
Tilt odds in your favor. Yeah. Yep. Yes, so that's excellent advice. And if one thing I've learned, calling around to different professors, I've kind of started in the Austrian Mises circle because that's what I'm first familiar with, but I've been branching out recently into some other free market places. And professors love talking about their work, which is kind of great for those who don't know much about it. It's a great way to learn. So kind of branching off of that, going a little bit more into some of your work. You're not an Austrian, an ex-Austrian, similar to if I understand correctly, similar to David Friedman in your kind of methodology.
David Friedman was never an Austrian.
Right, but now you're similar to him kind of in methodology there. So if you disagree with Austrians methodologically, and I'm kind of on the fence, I haven't decided, where do you disagree with them with policy or the actual analysis of how the economy works?
Well, let's see. I mean, so I would say that the policy views of Austrians are generally very bunched around fairly radical libertarian views, or especially the people associated with the Mises Institute. There's a lot of people who like Hayek and will call themselves Austrians, especially in Europe, who are actually very moderate and
Yeah.
say, oh, yeah, no, I think we need to have a welfare state. I think we need to have a lot of regulation to protect people. So that's, there's plenty of people who, at least like Hayek, who say, look, it's, like people have gone too far, but still, these policies are really quite good idea. So, and like, they're not wrong about what Hayek thought anyway. Let's see. So, right, in terms of like actual policy views, I'm probably much closer to the Mises Institute people. Because, I mean, there's the, I say a lot of it is just like their extreme certainty, which I think is unjustified.
Right.
I think, I actually was going on, like, this seems like the best idea, but like, that doesn't mean like I could still be wrong on that. I say, like, the evidence is often just very weak. And, like, we have like a general picture of how things work, but that's doesn't really give us any, but like, again, the level of certainty that they will profess, or actually just certainty, that's where I think that they are just being dogmatic and turning it into a pretty crazy religion. Let's see. And in terms of like, thinking about how the economy works, well, I'm at the Center for Study of Public Choice. So you know what public choice is?
I generally, yes. I got scratch the surface.
Using economics to understand politics. So I think a lot of what's bad about government is just that the people that are in charge don't have any desire to improve upon market performance, and therefore they create a bunch of regulation that no one ever should have expected would work out well. Austrians tend to be more fond of the idea of the well-intentioned regulator, but somehow there's some inherent contradiction in what he's doing, right? And sometimes that's true, but I think it's more often just that people in government are not really trying to do a good job. Like in the case of socialism, like Austrians have made a huge deal about the economic calculation argument. Are you familiar with the argument? Right. And they say, so this is like really great argument because even if government is really doing its best, it'll fail.
Right.
And that's what I'll say, well, why is it so important to come up with an argument about what happens if government's doing its best when we never see government's doing its best? And again, like often, like for them, again, it's some kind of, again, like there's some methodological attachment to like their arguments, even though I'll say, like, the arguments, again, like they're not terrible arguments, but as to why it's better to say that socialism is a bad idea because of a lot of the economic calculation problem rather than because Stalin managed to get to the top of the Soviet Union and murder 10 million people. Right? Like, I don't know, the 10 million argument seems a lot better to me.
Right. Do you think there's some?
You can't be certain they'll kill 10 million people. All right. Yeah, but seems like a reasonable forecast. That something
historically the odds are pretty good. Yeah.
Right.
Would you say?
Why are you so focused on the theoretical argument that's certain rather than an historical argument that is much weightier?
Do you think there's any relationship between the economic calculation argument and the fact that we don't see very many vertically integrated businesses, that we don't see very many businesses that take it from the raw materials to the finished product? Do you think because they have an internal calculation problem?
That's the point that Rothbard made. It's a good point. Yeah. So, like it's, I mean, regular economists would just put it under the category of diseconomies of scale. Say that when you make your business too big, then the bureaucracy of managing it all simultaneously is just excessive. And so, so again, I say economic calculation is only one of many reasons why we don't see completely vertically integrated firms. There's just the simple one is just the red tape, too much red tape, right? That's different from lack of calculation. It's just, man, like it's just too complicated. Like it's, when you go and hire someone to go and take care of your gardening or something, it's not really economic calculation that's the reason. It's just like, all right, well, I'm already swamped. It's too complicated. I don't want to have to learn another thing. Just pay them, throw some money at them. They'll handle it. So I think
that's what my dad does actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like it's one argument among many. So when I did actually have this big argument with Pete Betke about the economic calculation argument in Critical Review, I was saying that actually, when like in actual historic socialist regimes, while like the main thing that we saw was not that they were free riding off of Western prices, but they were deliberately doing stuff that they knew would not make sense at Western prices. Right? Because so much of the Soviet economy was based upon public relations. Strangely, it's like saying we have the biggest truck factory in the world. You cannot have any truck factory like our truck factory. See, we are great. That's sort of like classic Soviet gigantism, they called it, right? So I mean, really, what they're doing is, like if they went and used Western prices, they would see that it'd be better to have 10 small truck factories and you get more trucks for the resources. However, when the goal is to go and have propaganda and basically run a propaganda-based economy where you talk about how big and great everything is, then you do this other thing, which doesn't make a lot of trucks, but it's good for chest thumping, as we call it, like gorilla.
Right. It's almost like they're trying to reduce internal demand by fueling patriotism instead of actually trying to increase the supply of trucks. I don't know.
Like, and just create a society just based upon fanaticism, which plenty, given that the country was founded by fanatics, it's not surprising that they put a lot of value upon just fostering fanaticism.
Yeah. So recently I got a scholarship to the Austrian research conference this March. Do you have anything I should watch for going in with the Mises crowd or with that group of people?
Institute one, I guess. Right. Well, I mean, I would just talk to as many people as you can. Show up with questions. I mean, honestly, I would be keeping your eye open for just fanatical statements of various kinds, where it's like, really. Right. Like I met all of the main people in 1989, would be right before I started college. So I mean, I showed up a lot of questions, and I don't know, right. Most obviously, I think Hermann Hoppe, the very high IQ guy. I think he's just a crazy, and really, I know.
Right.
And again, I don't just consider him wrong. I just consider him phenomenally ignorant. Actually, he has immense knowledge about a bunch of books that all self-reference each other, but in terms of actually understanding the real world, I think he knows very little. It's just that he has a great stage presence. He has enormous great confidence. And again, I do not dispute the man's IQ. I know a lot of people like that moron. Moron. He's a very smart fanatic, and those are very different things. Just like I bet the Ayatollah Khomeini. I bet he was a very smart guy.
Right.
Actually.
I mean, Stalin and Hitler were brilliant.
Yeah, in terms of what did the Ayatollah Khomeini really know? Next to nothing. He just sits around reading a bunch of books written by ignorant men over 1,000 years ago. Yeah, so his knowledge of the world is very low, but his ability to intellectually manipulate a bunch of nonsense is off the charts. Right? I mean, I bet I haven't read Khomeini, but again, when you go at theocracies, these guys are not dumb. They're brilliant minds. It's just that it's all this brain power spent trying to rationalize a pile of ignorant nonsense. Again,
I only read Democracy, the God That Failed.
Orthodox rabbis. There's Orthodox rabbis. Their IQs are off the charts. They're geniuses, but they just don't know. They know so little about the world. They just sit around trying to reconcile 10 ancient books with each other. And it's right, and have very subtle arguments. And it's all right, well, yeah, I mean, just in a way, just goes to show you how sheer IQ is overrated if you don't focus on the facts and if you don't have the mentality, I'm going to humble myself before reality. Just because I love these books and they mean a lot to me doesn't mean they actually are of any value. And
so shifting tacks a little bit to personally talking with people. I have a lot of friends who are on the right. I'm more in the Christian conservative type circles, and they're pretty comfortable with free market policies, not quite as extreme as I am. I'm also, at least as of now, an anarcho-capitalist, but they're pretty much okay with that. But they're not quite as comfortable with legalizing drugs and prostitution and open borders. Do you have any articles or people I should watch or books I should read to help understand those arguments and say why the world is not going to fall, crash and burn if we had a little bit more freedom there?
I mean, the open borders, I have my whole book, Open Borders, and I mean, I really did try to make it accessible to conservatives, and you may notice I have multiple biblical scenes in there, which led some critics to say, oh, this is all just a bunch of Christian nonsense. No, these are great stories that illustrate points. And and people know, and the story has a lot of cultural resonance. So that's why I did it. I'm not just saying God wants open borders. I'm just saying, hey, look, here's a story about, who's your neighbor? What's the point? What's the lesson of the story? So open borders, I feel like that's about as persuasive as I could possibly be on that. On the other ones, I mean, if there's a reasonable person to say, well, let's look at places where they have legalized drugs. Let's look at places where they have legalized prostitution. Right, and just see. First of all, obviously, society does not collapse. Needless to say. And then,
do you have any shining examples?
Pardon?
Yeah. Do you have any shining examples of those?
Well, let's see. Of course, for legalizing marijuana, we now have lots of places right in the United States that have legalized marijuana. I can tell you that 40 years ago, there are plenty of people who thought that legalizing marijuana would make society collapse. So, There's that. I mean, like in terms in the prostitution, of course, a bunch of European countries legal prostitution. Nevada has legal prostitution.
Right.
I mean, I doubt that for the prostitution. I think you have to be kind of off your rocker to go and say that's going to lead to the collapse of society.
Yeah.
For the drugs, again, it's one where like it's at least a little bit easier to see what people are talking about. It is true that we have an enormous number of overdose deaths right now when it's illegal. That's one where the point of a lot of the reason why people are overdosing is because when they're sold illegally, then normal people say because they're not properly regulated. Free market person can say that we don't have the normal market checks upon product quality, so that's why there's like two kinds of fentanyl, and one is like 100 times as potent as the other. And if you're an idiot, it's easy to go and accidentally make the more potent kind accidentally, right? Which means that right now, a lot of overdose deaths are caused just by incompetent people going and manufacturing the stuff. So it's at least plausible that overdose deaths would go way down in a world of in a free market drug world. Again, it could be that safety per use would go way up, but use would expand so much that we would still even have more overdose deaths. I think that's unlikely, but I can't prove that it's not true. Right. I mean, I would say that it's also useful when you look at places where it's legal, is you can go and say, look, there's a bunch of negative side effects of prohibition that we see disappearing or mostly disappearing in places when you legalize it. So like prostitution no longer spreads venereal disease to a noticeable degree in Germany. The prostitutes get inspected for venereal disease or tested, and so and then they can't work if they are going to spread disease. So we got that. And that's what also the historical ones. You say a lot more people are dying of alcohol, like alcohol adulteration during Prohibition than would die of alcohol adulteration now. So these are the things you would say to a reasonable person.
Right.
I mean, also just like talking about like how many people are in jail right now for for victimless crimes. It is like a low estimate, I'd say, is the hundreds of thousands.
Right.
Right. So I mean, it's one where you say people usually want to just focus on the users. The poor innocent users are victimized by the evil sellers, but we shouldn't jail users. I mean, that's one where you say, well, we're doing it for the good of not only for the good of the user we imprison. Maybe that's implausible. We're doing it for the good of all the people that don't use because they're scared of going to jail. More plausible. But then, of course, like a real libertarian will say, well, yeah, the seller shouldn't be in jail either.
Right.
So, I guess I would just say that, like the step one is just to convince people just to turn off the hyperbole and saying, all right, look, we can have a conversation about what would happen. It's just not reasonable to predict the sky to fall. So if we could just get rid of the hyperbolic language about disaster and doom and destruction and get it down to, I think there would be 3% more overdose deaths if drugs were legal. That's the kind of thing where, once people are talking that way, then you can have a good conversation at least and say, all right, and then that's where you say, maybe you're right. But should we really be so confident? Does it really make sense to go and jail hundreds of thousands of people to get the overdose deaths down by 3%?
Right. Yeah, and I think at least from my conversations, it's always been useful to kind of, and I did this with the open borders a little bit. It's just saying, why do we assume that control is the default state? That's not an accurate assumption. The free state should be the default, and you have to prove that intervention is justified. They rarely have.
It's a great thing to tell libertarians who already ought to accept that. Again, this is where there is the idiotic Hoppe argument of, well, the country belongs to the citizens, so the countries have rights to regulate immigration. Which, if you think about it, also, you can't go and invite someone to move into my house without my permission, so you shouldn't be able to move into my country without permission. So, all right, well, let's see. So you aren't allowed to open up a store in my house without my permission, so you should need government permission to open a store. There should be licenses. You aren't allowed to do international trade in my house without permission, so we need to have tariffs. You aren't allowed to open up a church in my house without my consent, so government should regulate religion. It's like it is actually. I mean, I call this anarcho-totalitarianism, where it's an argument where if you took it seriously, you'd wind up handing government infinite power. And then I think it's obvious the reason they don't do this is because I think they realize that obviously open borders is the libertarian position, but they don't want to admit that they're not being libertarian about it, and therefore they come up with this cockamamie story about how country is like a house.
But yeah, it completely contradicts their whole argument against government,
Yeah,
which is that it's not actual property rights.
yeah.
So I know you have to go in a few minutes. So just a couple more questions. Finish up with the World Economic Forum. I've just finished listening to a video a friend just sent me about the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum has talked about. And so you have a lot of people on the right saying, okay, they're changing the banking system. World Economic groups are trying to change things economically and structure like credit systems, things like that. What do you know of the Great Reset, and what's your opinion of that?
Probably greatly exaggerated. You know, there's always change happening. The idea that there's some great change happening right now, you know, crypto is not a great change. The actual use of crypto is still extremely rare. Let's see, like other aspects. Usually, I've heard people talk about the Great Reset in the context of like young people not being able to go and get really good jobs right out of college now. So, you know, I think of that more as credential inflation rather than some great reset. Or just
it's easier than ever to get a job right now.
Yeah, there's just too many degrees floating around. So if you want to get a good job, then you need to have really good degrees.
And then I guess a final point, you've written some on like child rearing, family, and I haven't read those books, but I have listened to some of your podcasts on that. Do you have any advice for a young guy getting started in family? Any hacks on how to be happy in family life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's see. Well, I mean, you're serious about it. One of the big differences between men and women is women are much more interested in getting married and having kids at a younger age. So part of it is just credibly signaling that you're actually on board with that. Of course, you know, most women will not be interested unless in you until for that purpose, unless you've already got some reasonable prospect of being able to be a provider. You know, like you know, all feminism notwithstanding, that's the way the world continues to work.
Yep.
Let's see. In terms of advice, I guess you know, like I mean, I would say that especially you know, all young people, especially men, put way too much emphasis on looks. And it's much better to focus on personality and compatibility. You know, like you know, my view is like almost all young women are highly attractive, and so if you can just get out of the mindset of, well, sure, she's like 95th for a human, but I need to have 99th for a human, right? If you can just go and say, wow, like you know, just you know, if this were Desert Island, this girl would be like, you know, it would be like, you know, like. You know, giant ice cream sundae bar.
right.
In terms of just like yum yum. Yeah, so that, but you know, like I think like way too little emphasis put on personality. So yeah, like you know, like people like undervalue just like cheerfulness. You know, like just you know, people who are cheerful and happy even if things aren't going exactly their way.
Right.
So that you know that's one important one. Just reliability, loyalty, super important. I mean, especially if you want to have kids, loyalty is of extremely high importance because like you don't want to have kids with someone and then say, yeah, I'm kind of tired of you. I mean, I think I'll go and divorce you and then take your kids away from you. So again, that's the kind of thing that's, you know, like if you get someone that isn't that loyal, where it's, you know, that's a serious issue that you have, right? Or the other way around, of course, if the person is not loyal, they can say, yeah, well, I can take you or leave you. So you're going to have to go and do everything that I say from now on, or else I'll dump you and break up and make our kids grow up in a broken home. Rarely will someone put it quite that bluntly, but that's the reality for a lot of guys is that they go and they focus on women's looks or whatever, or something more superficial. And then it's like, oh, gee, she doesn't really like me that much. And so she doesn't feel that bad about dumping me. And then often it's like, yeah, well, like you're useful for child support, but I don't see what other purpose you serve in my life. You just inconvenience me, bother me, remind me of my mistakes. So that's something to keep in mind. So personality, very important. Shared interest, really important. So which obviously is very hard if you have interest in things like economics and libertarianism, where
not exactly a large female population,
which are not that popular. Let's see. So like obviously there's some compromise you have to make. This is one where especially if you get them while they're young, often people will just not have their views formed. So it's like you sell yourself in other ways, and then say, I have these unusual views. Would you be interested in them? And if they're like, that's so boring or horrible, and it's like, well, probably this isn't going to be such a great match. Let's see. So, I mean, just to be blunt, I will say I would say that you're well above average in looks. So I think that you have a lot of that probably raises your market value a lot. Which again, most guys who are good looking would then say, well, then I'm just going to get a woman who's as good looking as I am. That's what I'm entitled to. You could do that, but you could say, I will go and find someone who is more average in looks, but is very loyal to me and appreciates me, and is easy, is really fun and easy to get along with. And of course, also, has a similar view about a good number of kids to have. I wouldn't bring that up on a very first date, probably, especially at your age.
Give it a little bit, yeah.
But yeah, but like if there's someone who says, yeah, I don't know if I want to have kids, and you do, they're like, well, now to be fair, like the normal pattern is for women to increase the number of kids they want over time.
Okay.
Most obviously, from a lot of younger women will say, I don't know if I want them, or maybe I want 0. And then the actual share that sticks with that plan of 0 is actually quite low. And it's not because men pressure them, it's internal.
Right. As the maternal instincts grow, almost.
Says they want kids, it's not like mean that they never will. But it's one where it's just easier to find someone who already is closer to what you're looking for. Like a more general advice, for women, but for all things, is just be super friendly to everybody. This is one of the things the Mises Institute is definitely not practicing anyway. Probably possibly not preaching either, right? But it's just a really good idea to get a very large pool of options by being really cool to everybody, and turn the other cheek, right? It's this is a solid core of Christian insight. The value of turning the other cheek. Of course, they've got a whole theological story. I just say it's a way of turning enemies into friends. Even if the person himself is mean to you, and that doesn't work. Onlookers, if there's a debate and one person is super cool to the other one and the other one's a jerk, it's hard not for neutral people to say, I like the person that was cool.
Right.
Don't like the person who's a jerk.
You mentioned Bible stories and then just now Christian a little bit. Are you a Christian, or what are you?
No, I was raised Catholic. Not religious, but definitely plenty of valuable literature there. And just in terms of talking to people, if there's a story people have heard and it's relevant, no reason not to go and talk about the story.
Right. Well, thank you for your time. I think we're about at 30 minutes.
All right. So if you're ever in DC or in DC area, let me know. We can get lunch.
Yeah.
If you're ever over in Nashville, my sons are at Vanderbilt, so I bet you enjoy talking to them.
Yeah, I might get if you could send me their email if they would be interested. I don't want to push something on them, but if they're interested, you could send me their email.
They would be very happy to buy you pizza.
Okay, great. Well, I will let you know if I ever come up that way. And thanks for talking to me.
Okay, all right, sure thing. All right, so keep it in mind. All right, talk to you later. Bye.
Okay, thanks.
All right, good luck with all you do, Isaac. Bye bye.
Okay.